Good evening, and a warm welcome to all educators joining us today. On behalf of CENTA, we are delighted to have you with us for another insightful session in our ongoing CENTA webinar series for teachers, a space where passionate educators come together to learn, reflect, and grow professionally. We are proud to share that we recently celebrated our 300th CENTA, and today we welcome you to the next milestone, the 307th CENTALK. Your presence and participation continue to inspire us as we build a stronger, more empowered teaching community. This evening session addresses a deeply important and timely topic that affects every educator, regardless of experience or role. The session is titled Importance of Communication in Personality Development. Now, it is our pleasure to introduce the facilitator for this transformative session, Dr. Subhoda Banerjee. We
Thank
are
you for
pleased to
this gracious welcome, Upasana ma'am. I'm
thank
really
you.
glad that CETA has given me this opportunity to speak today in front of
Thank you so much.
so many learned audiences. Thank you so much. Very good evening to my wonderful audience. It is really, really heartwarming to see such, enthusiastic and overwhelming participation. Your presence definitely shows your eagerness to learn, share, grow. And of course, I am thrilled to be part with all of you guys in this exciting journey. I'll be presenting on the topic importance of communication in personality development. And during this 1 hour session, we will definitely explore some insightful ideas, some practical tips, and of course, some real life scenarios that I'm sure will be both useful and engaging for all of you. So sit back, stay curious, and feel free to interact because learning is a two-way process. And once again, thank you. Let's explore this learning session, all of us together. Well, I would start with the slides. Okay. Firstly, we need to understand the importance of personality and personality development because, of course, our topic of discussion for today is importance of communication in personality development. So once we start with this, of course, I would really want my audiences to, give their inputs in the comment section. Of course, that will help us to enrich our understanding on the subject in a more better and effective manner. So as I start with my presentation, so the term personality theoretically is the sum total of ways in which an individual reacts and interacts with others. Generally, it is described as the deeply ingrained and relatively enduring patterns of thoughts, feelings, and behavior. In fact, when one refers to personality, it primarily implies what is unique about an individual, the characteristics that makes one stand out in a crowd. So, therefore, it is the sum total of individual psychological traits, characteristics, motives, habits, attitudes, etc. Personality development, on the other hand, is defined as a process of developing and enhancing one's personality. Now, whatever I have told you, I have simply read it out from this slide. And of course, we understand that this is what theoretically personality and personality development talks about. Now, I would like to give you a scenario, so that, the concept of personality and personality development becomes more clearer to all of you. So hypothetically, let's take the example of a person whose name is, let's say, Mr. Ravi. So let's imagine that Mr. Ravi is a talented software engineer in a very reputed MNC. Now, his personality before development, we see that Ravi is pretty intelligent. Of course, he has good subject matter expertise as well, good amount of skill set. That's the reason he has been hired in a top graded MNC. However, it is seen that, Mr. Ravi fails to, maintain eye contact with his audiences, his team members when he speaks or during his meetings. Not only that, on various occasions, it has been seen that, he is very, very nervous. He doesn't looks very confident when he is speaking in front of others. That's why occasionally it is seen that he prefers to remain silent. That's the reason what happens, he is not recognized amongst his peers and his superiors. So these are the personality traits that Mr. Ravi has. However, over a period of time, Mr. Ravi, we see that he puts in that extra effort. And while he puts in that extra effort, what he does, he works on practicing communication on a daily basis. He improves his body language. He maintains eye contact. He smiles while he discusses things with his colleagues and his superiors. Of course, he presents ideas confidently in simple words. And of course, also what he does, he also listens actively to others. Now, these qualities, when he starts imbibing on an ongoing process, what we see the result is that Mr. Ravi is seen to speak more clearly. He is able to deliver whatever he wants to deliver, comprehend his context to the listeners. And as a result, what we see that in his professional setting, also Mr. Ravi gains respect and recognition from his peers and his superiors. And eventually, he becomes the team lead and the manager. So this particular scenario that I shared with you all, this clearly tells us the difference between personality and personality development. So wherein if you go by the first, the first part of the scenario wherein Mr. Ravi is pretty shy, he gets nervous and he's not able to speak well, that shows his personality. But however, after honing his personality skills, that means the process of developing and enhancing one's personality, that means he develops his personality. Therein, the personality development is exhibited in such a manner that he becomes a confident speaker, a confident orator in his organization. So this is how we can understand the difference between the term personality and personality development. Also, we need to understand here that both the concepts goes hand in hand. Moving on, now the central theme of today's discussion, which is talking about communication, the most in-demand skill. Now, there's a very well-known proverb by Sir W.B. Yeats, which says that think like a wise man, but communicate in the language of the people. This proverb is very, very apt and it is totally resonating our today's discussion. Why? I would again like to, tell you all or share a story. Of course, that story is very impactful. The name, you can say the title of the story is The Invisible Wi-Fi Lesson. Now, in this story, what we see that there is a professor whose name is Professor Sharma. Now, what he does, Sir Sharma or Professor Sharma, he is, a very versatile professor, has a considerable amount of, 18 years of experience in his teaching domain. And of course, he's very beloved and respected amongst his peers and students as well. Now, one fine day during a while, he started delivering a lecture in during his classes, and the lecture was on, it was on building self confidence and growth mindset. Now, while he started delivering his lecture, it was very rich contextually, conceptually. However, while he started delivering, he saw, or rather, he witnessed that it was really, really heavy for his students to understand the concepts well. So he could sense that he was not in a position to connect well with his students. Now, what he did, the professor paused for a moment. Not only he paused, after taking a pause, what he did, he laughed, or rather he smiled. And after smiling, he made a statement. What kind of statement he made? He made a statement saying, your students, your confidence level is like the Wi-Fi. If it is too weak, you need to move closer and you need to reboot. The moment he came up with this statement, the entire scenario changed. All the students started listening to the professor, and there was a curiosity that was instilled amongst all the students present in the classroom. And the professor went on. He smilingly said that, strong Wi-Fi signal is equal to high level of confidence. Weak Wi-Fi signal is equal to low level of confidence, which is also equal to self-doubt. And he also said too much password protection, that's when you don't share your thoughts. Now, he continued and he said that, so what do we do when we see that the Wi-Fi signal is weak or it is poor? Of course, we tend to move closer towards the Wi-Fi router. We reset the router. We reboot the system. So these are the things that we tend to do. And the moment he came up with the analogy with regards to the Wi-Fi signal, it was seen that the students started discussing and answering in a very, very interesting manner. The students immediately started responding, saying that, we need to practice more, sir. We need to ask for feedback. That's very important. At times, if required, we need to crack jokes as well. So these were the answers that came up from the students. Now, what is the impact of this particular story that I'm sharing with you? Of course, what we see here is that by thinking deeply, the professor understood what builds confidence. But by speaking simply in line with, or by taking the simple example of a Wi-Fi signal, what Professor Sharma did, he instantaneously connected with his students. The students remembered the key techniques. What were the key techniques? Like, practice. For practice, what you need to do, you need to move closer towards the Wi-Fi. Feedback. That's what is resetting the button. Gradual sharing. Remove the passwords. Make it, of course, passwords needs to be strong and effective, but that doesn't mean that every step you need to make it password protected. It's of course important. So sharing of thoughts, sharing of ideas, beliefs becomes important. And of course, one of the students also cracked a joke in the class wherein the student said, my confidence level dropped, just need to reboot my brain. So you can see the drastic transition that happened in that particular classroom, which just a few or a couple of minutes before, the students were not able to connect well. There was no sort of enthusiasm or curiosity that was observed. So therein what we see, the moral of the story is that the professor thought like a wise academician, understanding the intricate psychology of building self-confidence, but he spoke like a teenager, and that's where he connected well with his audience. Therefore, the question that comes here is that how is this story related to personality development? Yes, of course, it is very, very important because communication is the key, number one. Also, the fact that the communication becomes more and more effective, what we see that suddenly complex ideas becomes funny, it becomes memorable. People start resonating, connecting with such ideas. And that's where what happens? Communication helps in shaping personality. So therefore, what we see, the moral of the story is deep insights made simple. Therefore, what we see, communication becomes the backbone of personal as well as professional success. Now, when we talk about communication skills, we need to understand this word communication has been derived from the term communis, which is nothing but it means to share. Now, what is being shared? Of course, ideas, thoughts, beliefs, messages, feelings, etc. Therein, we need to understand the ABCs of communication, wherein A stands for what? Accuracy. Accuracy in terms of sharing information that is factually correct. Now, what are facts? Facts means nothing. Like, the fact that right now I'm delivering a presentation in front of you about the importance of communication and its role in personality development, that's a fact. Some of you are listening to me with a lot of curiosity. That's again a fact. Maybe some of you are not listening to me. That's also a fact. So, whatever information is shared, that needs to be factually correct. Accuracy in terms of grammar that we use. Now, second, we see what's brevity, B. B stands for brevity, which tells us what? It tells us that we need to keep our communication concise. It needs to be relevant. The more relevant our communication becomes, of course, the statements becomes relatable, and of course, it's easy to comprehend. And third thing is talking about what? Clarity. So be clear. That's important. So the more concise it is, the more clearer it will be. So these are the ABCs of communication. Now, there is a scenario in this particular slide wherein we see what? We see that a teacher said, we might have something tomorrow related to that chapter. Maybe 9 or 10, bring everything you have. Now, I would request my audiences to post in the comment section that this particular scenario, what they are seeing in the slide currently, whether this is in line with the ABCs of communication. You can drop your comments in the comment section. Well, I am giving you the answer. Of course, please ensure that you also share your perspectives in the comment section. Now, this particular scenario has a lot of ambiguity. There are many lacunas, and that's why we can very clearly say that it is not mapping with ABCs of communication. Had it been a scenario that the teacher would have said something on this line that, class, tomorrow we have an important test. The test will be on chapter 5, that is on communication skills. Now that becomes accurate, accuracy is maintained. Then the teacher says, be ready by 10 a.m. sharp. So that's brevity. The teacher is keeping it concise, to the point, and relevant as well. And the teacher also says, bring your writing materials. However, you do not need to bring any calculator. A very specific instruction, clear-cut instruction, which is talking about what? Which is talking about clarity. So therefore, what we see that the ABCs of communication skills definitely helps human beings to exchange their thoughts, their beliefs in personal as well as in professional setup. And of course, it is very important to effectively make others understand what we want to convey. Moving forward, the next slide talks about what? It talks about verbal and non-verbal communication skills. So these are the two types of communication skills. Now, you can see in my presentation that, there's a chart and there are some pictures which is there, and that's talking about the, the content of comparisons. Now, of course, when we talk about verbal communication, we see that it is talking about spoken or written languages which are used to convey clear and precise messages to the other person. However, when we talk about non-verbal communication, it is primarily focusing on what? It focuses on the facial expressions, the body language, the posture, the eye contact, etc. Now, coming to consciousness, of course, verbal communication is typically conscious and deliberate in nature because we choose the words and structure them intentionally. However, when we talk about non-verbal cues, they are often subconsciously done. So, because your expressions or tones are used and that convey the feelings. So, we need to be more cautious with regards to non-verbal communications. Now, when we talk about the context, verbal communication in low context settings also, we can use explicit language to deliver what we want to say. However, when we talk about non-verbal communications, therein, high context interactions is required because it is relying on environment, culture, relationships that are used to express nuances. Moving on, when we talk about decoding, what we see, decoding, it's about understanding the messages. So therein, verbal is decoded through language, knowledge, grammar, vocabulary, tones, etc. Now, non-verbal decoding happens by interpreting facial expressions, by interpreting our postures and gestures. Mode, of course, verbal mode includes, it could be in any form, writing, talking, phone calls, video calls, etc. However, non-verbal is more of combination of visual and audio. It's more of, a combination of body language, your silences, the tones that you are using, etc. Time consumption, yes, of course, verbal is generally faster because it's more direct in nature. But when we talk about non-verbal, it may unfold, but little slowly as compared to verbal communication. Because when we talk about non-verbal communication skills, it is primarily focusing on observation and interpretation. Moving on comes up physical presence. Of course, physical presence in verbal communication, it can happen remotely also. I mean, because now with the blessings of technology, we can, connect with other people via phone call, via email, via text, etc. And it's not necessary that the people has to be present physically in front of you. But non-verbal communication there, it often requires a co-presence because body language, eye contact, it's more, you can say, proximity or context dependent. That is with regards to non-verbal communication. However, even though we see there are set of differences between both these types of communication skills, but they both complement each other. We cannot negate the fact. Of course, they do complement each other. Why? Because, when words, tones, and body languages aligns, the messages that are conveyed becomes more clear and persuasive. Example, let's say, for example, I say, I am excited. Now, the moment I'm saying I am excited, I am chuckling as well. There is a smile in my face. So that shows my gesture accompanied with my statement shows that, there is a amalgamation of both verbal and non-verbal communication skills. So that's why we need to understand that both of these types of communication skills do complement each other. Moving on, or rather, before we move on, since we are talking about both these skills, we need to just remember certain important parameters. Like I said, that, they complement each other. Therefore, the idea when we communicate with another person is to ensure that the content or the purpose for which we are sharing our messages, that needs to be clearly stated. Secondly, proper sequences must be maintained so that, it is easier to comprehend what we are conveying. Thirdly, the style, the choice of words, grammars, those are important. And fourthly, delivery, your words needs to be accompanied by proper expressions and gestures. And then only whatever you want to convey to the other person, that will be conveyed in a very, very effective manner. Moving on to the next slide. The process of communication, if you see, there's a diagram which clearly tells us that, this kind of breakdowns the process of communication, and it tells us that this is sender. Who is the sender? The person who, it could be a person or a group of individuals as well. So who are initiating the communication? So they are the originator of the message. Now, the message, obviously, what is this message? And message is nothing but the information idea that is being communicated. So that's the message. Now, this message needs to be encoded. When I say encoded, encoding or encoded, that means what? It's the process of converting the messages into a transmissible form. And then, of course, we need to ponder upon one important aspect, that when the messages are sent, communication cannot happen in a vacuum. Of course, you need a medium to communicate. So, of course, the channel is nothing but the medium. So therein what we see, the medium could be face-to-face medium, it could be via email, via phone call, via video calls, etc. Now, receiver is there. Now, who is the receiver? The individual or group of people who is receiving the message that has been sent by the sender. Now, decoding, that means what? The receiver, it's basically the receiver's process of interpreting the message. And now when the receiver interprets the message, what we see that feedback comes into picture. Now, when we say feedback is the, it's basically the receiver's response to the message. Now, herein, how the receiver responds, I mean, how the receiver conveys his message or her message, the receiver either responds or reacts to the message that has been sent by the sender. Now, the moment the receiver responds, that means what? That means it indicates understanding of the message in a clear manner. However, if the receiver reacts, that means there are lacunae, there are certain challenges which are present, and that's the feedback that the receiver is giving to the sender. So feedback becomes an important process in this entire process of communication. Of course, the context is very, very important, because the situation or the environment in which the communication takes place, that we need to always keep in mind. And of course, noise comes into picture, because of course, when we say noise, it is nothing but any sort of interruption that disrupts the communication cycle or the communication process. Therefore, what we see, noise is nothing but the barriers to communication. In the next slide, we'll be discussing about that. So therefore, what we see that effective communication is based on 3C concept. What are these 3C? Number one is clarity. Second is conciseness. And of course, third one talks about consideration. So it also involves what? Choosing the appropriate channel for the message and ensuring that the messages are decoded accurately. Moving on to the next slide, which is talking about barriers to communication. Now, when we talk about barriers to communication, if you remember in the previous slide, I told you noise. Those are the barriers to communication. Or what are those barriers? We have, let's say, number one, psychological barriers. Now, when we say psychological barriers, it's like, using different, you can say it's psychological, like, mental state is not proper. Let's say there are stress, there is lack of attention. These things affects the understanding. It could be in any form. Let's say speech fear, stage fear. It could be speech disorders, etc. So let's say, for example, someone is very anxious, and because of the fact that the person is undergoing some sort of anxiousness, what we see, that person may misinterpret a simple instruction as a criticism. So that contributes towards psychological barrier in terms of effective communication. Second comes up language barrier. Now, when we say language barrier, so of course, different people tend to use different languages, people tend to use different jargons, different technical words. So these at times, of course, creates a lot of hindrances in terms of in terms of effective communication. So of course, when we say this, let's say, for example, there is a lawyer, and this lawyer uses complex legal terms while he converses with his clients. Now, obviously, the client is not a lawyer. The client doesn't understand those technical or legal terms which the lawyer is using. So obviously, what happens, there comes up a barrier. Okay. Thirdly, what we see, the third factor is the physical barrier. Now, when we say physical barrier, of course, it talks about the environmental factors like, distance, poor infrastructure, faulty equipment, closed doors, etc. So let me put it in this manner. Let's say, for example, a poor phone call connection, a poor network during a business call can lead to a lot of miscommunication and distractions. Fourthly comes up emotional barriers. Now, strong emotions like, anger, sadness, fear, etc. These things can also block effective listening or understanding. Now, let's say two colleagues are arguing on a very important topic. Now, the problem is that because they do not listen to each other, due to that heated argument that happens between them, they tend to miss on valid pointers. So again, a barrier to the communication, and this sort of barrier is more of an emotional barrier. You can also say it's a psychological barrier as well. Cultural barrier, of course, culture, when we talk about, it's about different values, different beliefs, different choices. Now, therein, of course, let's say, for example, a thumbs up is considered to be very positive in certain countries, but however, certain countries perceive thumbs up to be very, very negative in nature. So why? This is because the cultural differences that the countries are having. Now, then comes up attitude barriers. Of course, attitude like, ego, arrogance, superiority, complex. These definitely at times creates a lot of hindrances in effective communication. Let's say, for example, there is a manager of a renowned company. The manager doesn't listen or occasionally ignores the suggestions given by his juniors. Why? Because the manager is having an ego or attitude problem. There is an overconfidence that the manager has. So that again, there is an attitude barrier that is coming into place in this scenario. And then we have physiological barriers. Now, of course, physiological barriers is it's like physical conditions like hearing loss, speech disorders, fatigue, dyslexia. These could be certain parameters wherein we see physiological barriers to communications happens. Then comes technological barriers. Now, of course, we are in this current era, which is all about technology. Now, we need to become adaptable to the technology that we are using. Now let's say for example an online class is happening, and due to poor internet connection, and the teacher is not able to fix that internet problem as well. I mean, she's not that technologically equipped. The teacher is technologically handicapped, so the teacher is not able to present the slides properly. Number one, the teacher is not in a position to take the online class. These creates a lot of hindrances. So these are the technological barriers that also a lot many times it creates barriers to effective communication. Well, I'll take a pause here, and I'll just request the host to start the polling right away, because there is a polling question and there are a few options, and I would request my audiences to select the option that they feel that is very close, or rather they can resonate with that particular option. Please, all of you.
So the poll is on, and we are looking at the options right now. Everyone is very actively participating in it. And right now, most people are saying that they struggle the most with non-verbal mode of communication. The near second is confidence while expressing ideas.
Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your insights. It looks like, many of us, like ma'am said, that, the results are like non-verbal communication and, of course, confidence level. These two, are the challenging things that we need to, ponder upon, because they do, they do become barriers many a times, even though we are, very, very, I mean, we have the subject matter expertise, yet it's completely understandable that communicating clearly isn't always easy, and these are the barriers that comes into pictures often. Thank you, all of you. Moving on to the next slide. So first, now the question that we need to address is how to overcome communication barriers. Now, of course, there isn't any straitjacket formula. I would say that that only if we do these set of things, we are going to overcome all our communication barriers. However, these are the guided set of principles that we can keep in mind, or rather these can act as tips, practical tips for overcoming barriers of communication. So number one talks about practice active listening. Of course, you need to be a good listener. There is no second thought over here. So you should try to fully understand what the sender is saying, what the person who is trying to convey his or her idea is saying. So being actively listening, or being an active listener, that becomes very, very important. And that actually takes us to the third bullet point, which talks about empathy. Because when we are active listeners, this empathy, it involves understanding and sharing the feelings of others. So, and this actually helps us to build trust and confidence. Like I said, communication is a two-way process. So this active listening and empathy definitely helps us to overcome the communication barriers. Now, Second point, if we look at that, it talks about clear and concise language. Now, if I just go back to one of the previous slides, we have discussed about ABCs of communication. If you remember, brevity and clarity, that's very, very important when we want to do effective communication. So clear and concise language becomes important because uh, the more relevant the statements that we are using, and we use more relevant uh, things in our statement, it makes our conversation more clear. There comes up more clarity. So, to the point is what is expected from us if we want our communication to be effective. Now, moving on, also what we see, feedback mechanism. Now, this is very, very important, because seeking feedback, like, asking for feedback, so that, you can identify your areas of improvement. No one is born perfect. To err is human. So feedback is the key. Constant feedback from your co-workers, superiors, your supervisors, your friends, your family, etc., can actually help you to improvise upon yourself. Okay. Now, what we see moving on, yes, we should be aware of the cultural differences that we have, because cultural sensitivity. I mean, there is always a cultural sensitivity that comes into picture. So when communicating with someone from another culture, we need to be aware that there could be differences in terms of communication styles and norms. So we need to be very, very cautious there. Of course, use of non-verbal communication effectively. Now, that's where, when you use certain words, you build your sentences, your facial expressions, your tones, your eye contact, your gestures should match with whatever you are speaking. And of course, paying attention to your audience, that is the key. Because let's say, for example, you need to understand what is your audience, what your audience want. You need to ensure that you are adapting towards the audience's needs. And of course, technology utilization, because that's the key. Technology may become a barrier to effective communication if you're not in a position to utilize it properly. So we need to understand the utility of technology. Moving on, what we see, the next slide, this talks about the checklist for everyday conversations. Now, when we talk about the checklist, what we see, number one, talks about thoughtful pause. Now, this takes us to the story that I discussed at the initial, during the initial slides, which I was showing to you. If you remember, Professor Sharma's story. So, therein, what happened? Professor Sharma started his lecture. However, he took a pause when he saw that he could sense that he was not in a position to connect well with his students. So that thoughtful pause, and then he coming up in a different manner, that changed the entire scenario of that particular lecture. So thoughtful pause definitely creates a difference. That's very important. Secondly, what we see, simple and direct words. Again, we go by Sir W.B. Yeats saying that, whatever we want to convey, we need to keep it as simple as possible. Now, let's say, for example, a teacher comes to a classroom, and the teacher comes up with a statement saying that, students, today we are going to learn about bats. Now, considering the fact that she is not making it clear that whether she is referring to bats as animal, the animal that flies at night, or she is not referring that, whether she is referring to a cricket bat or a baseball bat. So obviously the students get confused. Now, some of the students starts looking at the ceiling, thinking that some bats are going to swoop down from there. Some of the students starts unpacking their bag, thinking that ma'am is talking about baseball bat or cricket bats. So the teacher needs to be more clear and very simple and direct with the word use of words that are being used as a part of the delivery process. So therefore, what we see, if the teacher says that today we are learning about bat, the animal that flies at night, that creates a difference. That's where we can say that it's a good example of simple and direct words. Next, what we see, third thing talks about active listening. We have discussed this in the previous slide. Yes, of course, we all need to be active listeners, because that is only going to build trust and confidence. It is going to prevent any sort of miscommunication. Fourth, aligning tone and body language. That's important, because non-verbal communication skills, that's where, it's important to align our non-verbal skills with whatever we are speaking. Now, use effective, aligning tone and body language. Next is moderate pace. Now, see, suddenly if I would have started the presentation in this manner, that today's session I'm going to discuss about importance of communication in personality development. There is a checklist for everyday conversations without any thoughtful pause, simple and direct words. Will you be able to understand what I am trying to convey? No. So therefore, moderate pace is required. You need to keep that pace so that whatever you are delivering, that's easy to understand and comprehend. Next, adapt it to audience. Now, you have to understand your audience's need. That's very important. Because if you do not understand what your audience wants, there's, of course, your communication will not be effective at any cost. Now, let's say, for example, uh, let's say there is a law teacher. Now, the law teacher has been asked by the university to teach law to the commerce students and not law to the law students. Now, obviously, the teacher has to, make some transition with regards to the strategies and the techniques that she's going to teach or he's going to teach. She's going to take up when she is teaching or delivering the concept of law to the commerce students' background, because obviously there's a difference as in how the commerce students will understand law and as to how the law students will perceive law. Right. So adaptability to audience is very, very important. Now, next, appropriate light humor. Yes, of course, please do infuse humor when appropriate. If you see that, again, if you go by Professor Sharma's story, which I have discussed earlier, that story, if you remember, he took a pause. And that pause was very thoughtful. And of course, after that pause, he smiled and then he came up with a statement. That light humor of that Wi-Fi signal and confidence, that actually created a lot of difference in that particular classroom. So you need to infuse humor when appropriate, and of course, seek and use feedback loop. We cannot escape that. That's very, very important, because we are talking about personality development. Personality development is what? It's the continuous and ongoing process as to how we develop ourselves. So feedback becomes the key here. Moving on. Now, of course, what is the relationship between communication and personality development? Yes, of course. This definitely, it's about expressing yourself, wherein, being good at communication goes beyond just talking. Of course, it's about expressing your thoughts and feelings in a way that others can understand. So you need to express yourself properly, building relationships. So your personality grows when you can connect with others in a meaningful manner. Now, how that will happen? Of course, via effective communication. Thirdly, talks about resolving conflicts. When we say resolving conflicts, yes, of course, our life is not a bed of roses. There are many challenges that we tend to encounter. So obviously, what we see that the moment we communicate our problems properly, there are potential chances of resolving those conflicts properly as well and effectively as well. Advancing professionally, yes, of course, employers value communication skills because they contribute towards teamwork, overall efficiency at work. Cultivating confidence, yes, confidence is crucial for your personality development. And developing leadership. This is very, very important. Now, when we say developing leadership, leadership is about what? Leadership is about guiding and inspiring others. And that's where communication comes in. So it is evident that communication skill and personality development goes hand in hand. There's again a poll question. I would request ma'am to kindly put it in front of the audiences so that the audiences can participate.
Yes, ma'am. The poll is on, so I request all the audience to give your answer. The question is, do you believe personality can be improved through communication? The current trend shows that most people thinks that personality can be improved through communication. Some people, 5% of them, believe that to some extent it can be improved through communication.
Thank you, ma'am. Very interesting. Most of you answered what we all tend to, believe that, which tells me that, personality can be indeed shaped by communication. Of course, we mostly agree on that particular pointer. Now, that particular belief opens the door towards growth, and that also opens the door to the next slide, which is talking about role in building confidence. Of course, the first one talks about clear expression reduces self-doubt. So when you express your ideas clearly, you feel more in control, and naturally that boosts your confidence level. Second talks about positive feedback encourages confidence. Effective communication definitely helps you to connect better with people. And third one talks about improved social interaction builds self-assurance. Now, of course, good communication makes it easier to interact, make friends with others. It helps in networking. So these are the role that we see that communication helps in building confidence. Now, communication for leadership. When we talk about this, here in what we see that leaders inspire through vision and storytelling. Active listening and persuasion builds trust. Communication drives team bonding or team building. So technically, when you think of any successful leader, let's say we talk about Narendra Modi, we talk about Shashi Tharoor, we talk about Barack Obama, etc. The primary common factor that is there amongst all the leaders is that they are all outstanding orators. So strong communication skills allow leaders to clearly define their visions in a way that inspires and empowers people like us, whether it politically, whether be it personally or professionally. So therein, of course, what we see, communication definitely, becomes an important factor when you want to be a true leader. Again, there is a polling question which I would request ma'am to just open it in front of the audience. Ma'am, if you could kindly open up the polling question.
Yes, ma'am, the poll is coming up. The poll is on, everyone. I would request everyone to give your answers. The question is, how important is communication for leadership success? The current trend shows that most people believe it is extremely important. Some people, around 10%, believe that it is not the only factor.
Thank you, ma'am. So we go by the majority view that communication is extremely important for leadership success, and that makes perfect sense. Effective leaders speak and connect clearly, and that's where we often get inspired by the leaders. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. There are 7 tips for improving our communication skills, which are like practice active listening, use clear and concise language, use non-verbal communications effectively, pay attention to your audience, be aware of cultural differences, manage your emotions, seek feedback. We have already discussed all of these pointers in details. This is just a summary of whatever we have discussed. Moving on, key takeaways of this session. Communication definitely shapes personality and confidence. Tone and body language matters. Active listening is equal to building stronger relationships. Clear and confident idea sharing is important. Communication is the tool for leadership impact. Moving on, as I draw the curtain of conclusion, I want to, come up with this important quotation: master communication, master success. That means what? Practice and continuous improvement are the key. Connect and share learning after the webinar. Now, this particular line I would want to, reflect upon, because, we are discussing about the importance of communication skills and personality development. Therefore, I would want to, before I end, I want to, quote the saying which says, communication doesn't end here. Let's continue the conversation. So stay connected. I'm just a click away. So I have shared my LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram profile, because I have been talking about communication is about nothing but, sharing your beliefs, ideas, etc. So therefore, this conversation, this session doesn't end here. This is going to be ongoing. And that's the reason I have shared my link of my pages as well as my Instagram handles. Please stay connected. Thank you, all of you, for patiently listening to me. Any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Subhoda ma'am, for such an engaging and informative session for our community of teachers. There are some questions, and I will read them out to you one by one. Or would you prefer to hear the questions together?
One by one would be better.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So, Rinku Gupta ma'am has asked, how would you differentiate between someone with good communication skills and someone with a strong personality? Can they exist independently?
Well, I would say that's a very, very good question. Yes, good communication skill could be a possibility that, a person has a very good communication skill, number one. And the other way, we see that personality of that person, it's is strong. But, we can take it this way. There's, let's say, for example, Mr. A. Mr. A is having a very good, strong personality. However, personality, as in, let's say, Mr. A has very good subject matter expertise, skill sets, he's flawless. But then the problem is that he is not effectively able to deliver or communicate with his audiences in an effective manner. He has a very strong personality, but the problem is that one of the personality traits is lagging, because communication skills and personality goes hand in hand. We have discussed that. So communication also acts like as a pillar for personality building, right? So therefore, there comes a problem that if the person is very sound, but it honestly, there becomes a concern if the person is not able to deliver it to the audiences properly, because then comprehension or understanding becomes a concern. Miscommunication comes up.
Thank you for such an illuminating answer. Hira Javed ma'am has asked us, can you please give some examples of physiological barriers?
Physiological barriers, yes, of course. So we'll just go back to the previous discussion when we were discussing all the different types of barriers. Therein, when we were discussing about physiological barriers, it's more about relating to the mindset. Okay. Now, when I say mindset, let's say, for example, a person, again, I take up from the question that has been raised by one of you, the first question. So the person is very, very well equipped, having good amount of skill sets, proper knowledge. Now, what the person lacks is the person has stage fear. Now, therein, that's a physiological barrier, because it's therein what is happening. Stage fear is actually creating a hindrance for that particular person to put in front of the audience what he already knows. Theoretically, he may be very sound, but that stage fear, not only stage fear, let's say, for example, speech disorder, that also contributes towards a physiological barrier. Sometimes even, simple things like, lack of attention, stress level. Let's say, for example, you have worked the entire day and you have to attend the meeting at 10 o'clock at night. Now, the problem is that you were very active at the beginning of the day, but problem is that eventually, because of the stress level, now you're at the then point of time wherein when you are interacting or when you are participating in that meeting, nothing goes in your mind or in your head. So then of course it becomes a barrier, because of course until if you are not comprehending or understanding what is being communicated to you, obviously you will not be in a position to reciprocate back to that.
Thank you, ma'am, for your answer. Krishna Tinku has asked, can level of knowledge and experience be barriers?
Okay, I would like to put it in this manner. Level of knowledge and experience, number one, generally it cannot be a barrier. But what happens if there is an involvement of attitude that comes into picture, then of course it becomes a barrier. Because see, at times we have to understand this. Learning is a continuous process. We are not. I mean, even Einstein has quoted that that it takes centuries. It takes years and years to learn everything. It's not possible to learn everything, right? So, of course, a person can be very knowledgeable, sound expertise and experience that he has. Of course, his experience has given him that experience. I mean, sorry, that experience has given him that expertise. But the problem is that the moment the person comes up with ego, attitude, superiority complex, then of course, then the barriers comes into picture. Because as teachers also, we tend to learn from our students. So, at times when we are learning, I mean, during a classroom interaction, many a times students makes us understand and learn many new things, many new concepts. So definitely we cannot use our attitude or ego at the then point of time thinking that, we are teachers, we are superior to them. No, it's a two-way process.
I absolutely agree, ma'am. Rajni Pandey has asked, how can we inculcate the habit of speaking in children?
Okay, so two things I would say. Number one, practice is the key. And when I say practice, practice in terms of listening, speaking both. And secondly, feedback. When a child is trying to inculcate the speaking process or listening process properly, feedback is important. You need to tell the children that, herein you can improvise. And when I say feedback, constructive feedback matters. It's not about discouraging the children. It's about encouraging the children that, you can do better, you can do better. And practice can only make a man perfect.
The last question for this session by Saveta Mehta is, what if a person has good communication skills but no leadership qualities?
Yes, of course. If a person is having good communication skills, leadership quality, when we talk about that, communication skill is one of the important parameters in building a true leader, one of the most important parameters. But as a leader, you also need to have certain other personality traits as well. So, when I say other personality traits, like, you need to be confident, because you have to understand why you are a leader, because you are standing out of the crowd. People are looking up to you because you are inspiring others, you are empowering others. So therefore, communication of course is one of the primary parameters as a leader that we should imbibe. But along with communication, having empathy for others, understanding what others want to convey, what are the challenges that others are facing, those things also needs to be kept in mind. So leadership quality, when we talk about that, I think an entire session is required, because there are many things which comes under the domain of leadership. But yes, of course, communication definitely is part of a good leadership skill.
Thank you so much for answering the question from the participants, ma'am. And again, thank you for this wonderful session. I
Thank
hope
you so
our
much. Thank you,
participants.
everyone.
Thank you. Uh, to the participants, if you have registered and filled out the feedback form for the session, check your participation record in the app in the My Learning section. I will guide you step by step through the instructions. Step 1, open the Center app on your device. Step 2, Navigate to the ongoing webinar section. Step 3, click on Submit Feedback. Please note that this option will be available at 6 p.m. Indian Standard Time, not before that. Step 4, at the end of the session, we will share a 4-digit code required for feedback. I believe the code has already been shared, but I'm reiterating it's 1847. And step 5, complete the feedback form and you will be able to download your record of participation instantly. This new process was introduced to streamline your experience and ensure your participation is instantly recognized. Thank you all for your active participation in today's session. Thank you.